Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jiran Khabi, your host, and today I'm going to react to a video called The Dark Origins of Megatron, the story that Hasbro kept secret for 40 years. Now, for new updates and content, you can visit the links in the description down below, and let's get started. Enjoy.
There won't be enough pizzas to sweep up.
You remember Megatron, the silver fist, the fusion cannon. That voice, cold, absolute, carrying the weight of someone who had never once doubted he deserved to win. Every Saturday morning he materialized on your screen already fully formed, a warlord, a conqueror, a force of pure mechanical malice pointed at everything good. He was the villain, simple, complete, done. Except he wasn't born that way. And Hasbro knew it. Here's what they kept out of your living room for almost 40 years. Before there was a Megatron, there was a miner. Before there was a Decepticon army, there was a manifesto. And before that manifesto, there was a number, not a name, stamped onto a robot who was built to dig and die in a mine shaft and never ask why. The story of how that number became the most feared name in the galaxy is not the story of a monster. It's the story of a system that manufactures monsters and then acts surprised when one of them turns around. To understand any of it, we have to start where the story actually starts. Not with the warlord and not with the war, but with a worker who had ideas and the misfortune to live somewhere that couldn't tolerate them. We have to talk about D16.
You've lost, Prime. The Decepticons have won.
Part 1. The Villain as We Knew Them. The Megatron you grew up with was a study in certainty. He wanted Cybertron. He wanted Earth's energy. He wanted Optimus Prime destroyed, preferably by his own hand, preferably slowly. Every week he came close. Every week something went wrong. Starscream undermined him. The Autobots rallied. Prime survived. And Megatron retreated, furious and unbowed, already calculating the next move. He never broke. He never doubted. He was the kind of villain who felt ancient, like he had always existed in this form, like conquest was simply his nature. That certainty was the lie. Not the cartoon's lie. The system's lie. The idea that some beings are simply born to dominate, the way others are simply born to serve. Megatron didn't arrive at conquest. He was driven there, step by deliberate step, by a world that decided what he was worth before he ever had a choice. But none of that is where the story starts.
Never! Prepare to blast off!
Part 2. The Person Before. The story starts underground. On Cybertron, before the war, there is a caste, not a metaphor, an actual enforced hierarchy that determines every aspect of a Cybertronian's existence based entirely on the function their body was built to perform. The system is called functionism, and its logic is brutal in its simplicity. You are what you do, nothing more. If your alternate mode is useful, if you transform into something the ruling class finds valuable, you have standing, you have rights, a designation, a place in the social order. If your alternate mode becomes obsolete, you become invisible. If you were manufactured to dig, you dig. You don't write, you don't philosophize, you certainly don't ask what you're digging for, or who benefits, or whether any of this was ever fair. Cybertron's Senate had been built on that silence for longer than most of its citizens could remember, and it intended to keep it. D16 was manufactured in a slave mine. That was his designation, not a name, a sector number. He was cold constructed, built, activated, assigned. From the moment of his awakening, his existence had already been decided for him. And here's what makes this origin different from every villain origin you've ever heard. D16 didn't respond to his condition with rage. He responded with ideas. In the hours between shifts, between the grinding labor of extracting energon for a Senate that would never acknowledge him, he was writing. A treatise, a philosophical document that began with 4 words that would eventually reshape a civilization. You are being deceived. Those 4 words didn't just become a rallying cry. In time, they became the name of an entire army.
I will build the ultimate weapon to defeat the Autobots, to control the planet, to conquer the universe!
Part 3. The wound deepens. The Senate knew about D16's ideas. That's the detail that changes everything. This was not a system that ignored dissent. It was a system that monitored it, contained it, and when containment failed, relocated it. When D16's writing began circulating among the working class of Cybertron, among miners and laborers and every Cybertronian who had been handed a function they didn't choose, the Senate responded by reassigning him, farther from the capital, deeper into the mines, away from anyone who might listen. They understood exactly what he was. They just didn't understand what he would become. The mine where D16 worked was eventually closed. Senator Decimus declared the workers obsolete, not fired, not reassigned, simply obsolete, and replaced them with drone labor. The beings who had built their lives in that shaft were discarded like worn-out equipment. And when a worker was killed by one of Decimus's guards for the act of complaining about it, something in D16 shifted. He picked up his mining tool and threw it at the senator. What happened next, he regretted almost immediately. The guard came for him. D16 killed the guard, the first life he had ever taken, and then sat in the chaos of the riot that erupted around him, staring at his fuel-stained hands in horror. This was not triumph. This was the moment a writer became something he didn't want to be. The Senate had their reason to imprison him. He crossed a line. But it's worth noticing who drew it and where it was placed, and who had benefited from its placement all along.
Use the scrap metal now, Prime! You'll never stop me!
Part 4. The Point of No Return. They put him on a prison transport, which should have been the end of D16. Two Cybertronians named Rumble and Frenzy had other plans. They broke free aboard the ship, started a riot of their own, and D16, already a prisoner with nothing left to protect, joined them. Together, they overpowered the guards, seized control of the vessel, and disappeared into the underground network of a city called Kaon. It was the point of no return, and D16 knew it. There was no petition he could file now, no appeal to the council. No version of this story where he walked back into the Senate and explained that he was really a philosopher who had made a series of unfortunate choices. In Kaon's underground, there were gladiatorial arenas, illegal death matches where Cybertronians fought for survival and crowds gathered to watch. D16 entered them. He was built for mining, which meant he was built strong, built to endure, built for conditions that would break something more delicate. He won, and won again. There's something almost too neat about that detail. This being designed by a system to be expendable, turning out to be nearly indestructible in the one context where that quality mattered. The arenas didn't make him powerful, they just revealed what the mines had already built. The arenas changed things, and not just his reputation. His identity started shifting there too. He began calling himself Megatronus, after a legendary figure from Cybertron's oldest mythology, Megatronus Prime, one of the 13 founding beings of Cybertronian civilization, and the one who had fallen from grace so completely that history had renamed him the Fallen, the first Decepticon. The choice of that name was not coincidence. It was a declaration. A miner who had been assigned a number was now claiming the name of the most powerful fallen figure in his planet's history. Whether that was ambition or poetry or both, probably depended on where you were standing when you heard him say it. The crowds heard him speak between fights, and they listened in a way they hadn't listened to anyone before. Eventually, they shortened the name. Megatronus became Megatron, and the treatise he had written underground, the document that began, "You are being deceived," became the founding text of a movement. The Decepticons took their name directly from that phrase. Every Cybertronian who bore that insignia was, in origin, a signature on that manifesto. There's something worth sitting with in that. An army whose very identity was a quotation from a philosophical document written in a mine shaft by a robot who just wanted to be heard. What Megatron bargained with was not a dark god or a cosmic power. It was the crowd's hunger and his own willingness to feed it with escalating violence. He was never a sincere revolutionary building something better. He wanted revenge, and he was skilled enough to make other people call it liberation. That gap between the injustice that was real and the answer he chose is where the monster was born. The full cost of what Megatron's path extracted from everyone around him, including the one Cybertronian who believed in him most, is a story dark enough to deserve its own video.
And Soundwave, tell them there'll be a special reward in it for them.
Part 5. The Suppression Story. Here's what Hasbro never put on your screen. That origin, the mine, the number, the manifesto, the gladiatorial pits, the 4 words that named an army, existed in print as early as 1986. 2 years into the cartoon's run, Marvel published a UK-exclusive Transformers annual containing a prose story called State Games, written by James Hill. It was the first time Megatron's pre-war identity appeared anywhere in the franchise. The story placed him in a political context, as a figure rising from conflict between Cybertronian city-states, using gladiatorial fame to unite the dispossessed. It's a remarkable piece of work for what was essentially a licensed tie-in publication. Thoughtful, morally serious, willing to treat the material as something more than a sales catalog. That story never crossed the Atlantic. American audiences never saw it. For the next 24 years, it stayed in the comics, expanded, deepened, enriched by writers who understood that the Decepticons were more interesting as a failed revolution than as a cartoon army. The 2007 IDW miniseries Megatron Origin, written by Eric Holmes, gave the complete account. The mine, Senator Decimus, the riot, the killing, the flight to Kaon, the arenas, the manifesto. It was all there. The reason the Decepticons existed, the wound at the center of everything.
I've got that issue.
The American cartoon never touched it. Because the cartoon was, at its foundation, a commercial, the show existed to sell toys. A Megatron with a sympathetic origin complicates the transaction. You can't sell a child a Megatron action figure by explaining that Megatron was manufactured into slavery by a corrupt government and responded to injustice in the only way the system left available to him. That conversation doesn't fit in a 30-second spot. So it didn't happen at all. It wasn't until 2010, 26 years after the cartoon premiered, that Transformers Prime became the first American animated series to show Megatron as a former miner and gladiator revolutionary. And it wasn't until 2024, with the theatrical film Transformers 1, that a mainstream American audience finally saw the complete arc. D16, the mine, the caste system, the moment a number became a name. 38 years after that UK annual first put it on paper, for 38 years you watched the villain. You were never shown the wound.
Starscream, convert the area for construction.
Part 6. The question it leaves. The question the origin leaves you with is a genuinely uncomfortable one. Does knowing this make Megatron more frightening or less? A monster born from nothing is just a monster. You can hate it cleanly, without ambivalence. But a monster born from a system that decided his life had no value before he ever had a chance to prove otherwise, that's something your living room wasn't equipped to show you on a Saturday morning. It asks you to hold 2 things at once: the reality of what he became and the reality of what made him. The injustice was real. The response to that injustice was catastrophic. Those 2 things don't cancel each other out. They just sit there together, which is harder than either one alone, and which is exactly why the cartoon never went there. The name Megatron chose was the name of a fallen god, but the name he was given at birth was D16, a number, a designation, a decision made by someone else about what he was worth. The fusion cannon isn't really a weapon when you look at it that way. It's a mine shaft pointed outward. In the end, D16 wrote 4 words that outlasted everything: the Senate, the arenas, Cybertron itself. You are being deceived. He was right. The tragedy is that the deception he destroyed was replaced by one he built. The Decepticons were founded on a true grievance and led toward a false answer. And somewhere between the manifesto and the conquest, the writer who wanted to be a medic was buried under the warlord who wanted to be a god. The movement he started bore his name, but had long since stopped serving his original purpose, if it ever really had. What remained was the violence and the ideology built around the violence, and the endless war that consumed the planet he had once wanted to save. That gap between who he could have been and who he became is the most human thing about him. Which is a strange thing to say about a robot, but there it is. If knowing where Megatron came from changes how you watched him, I'd genuinely love to hear it. Drop it in the comments. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. There are more buried origins in this vault than you might expect. The next video goes back to Cybertron to look at the being whose name Megatron borrowed. Megatronus Prime, the Fallen. The one who was the original Decepticon millions of years before D16 ever picked up a pickaxe. The villain you knew had a name before the mask, but the name he chose belonged to someone else first.
So that was the dark origins of Megatron. The story that Hasbro kept secret for 40 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I must say I was very impressed with this video, and what has been explained, we already saw most of it in the 2024 movie Transformers 1. The fact that Megatron or D16 worked in the slave mines, killed Senator Decimus's guard, being transported with Frenzy and Rumble and starting a riot with them, and escaping and disappearing to City of Kaon. That is very interesting to hear. Also, where D16 partook in the arenas, calling himself Megatronus Prime, which was actually after the Fallen, and also the manifesto. That was very interesting. I love the fact that he told everybody, you are being deceived. I love the fact as well that we learn from Transformers Prime, the cartoon, that it is mentioned that he also worked in the mines and was a gladiator revolutionary. But goodness me, the one thing that stood out is, you are being deceived. Wow. And I completely agree with the narrator. You cannot buy a toy with such a dark origin story. Yeah, the kids would have looked at it and said, nah, I don't want this. You know, that is completely understandable. And a word of wisdom for today. If you have a past that you are not proud of, look towards the future and build a bright future for yourself. Have a blessed day further, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.